What happens when a man chosen to deliver a nation becomes the trophy of his enemies? What happens when strength turns into shame? When purpose is buried under chains? And when the name once feared becomes a joke whispered in prison halls? This is not the story of Samson at his strongest. This is the story of Samson at his lowest. In the Philistine prison of Gaza, the sun still rises, but Samson never sees it. He stands blind and shackled, pushing a grinding stone in endless circles, day after day, step after step. The rhythm of humiliation has replaced the rhythm of victory. Once his hands shattered chains, now they are guided like an animal's, forced to serve the same people he was born to confront. The Philistines pass by and laugh. They mock the God of Israel. They call Samson proof that faith is fragile and power is temporary. To them, this is not justice. It is entertainment. Then the iron doors open. Harafa, a Philistine warlord, enters the prison with deliberate slowness. And beside him walks Delilah. She does not weep. She does not avert her eyes. She studies Samson like a finished project, a weapon successfully dismantled. Harafa calls him a miracle of defeat. Delilah calls him a waste of potential. "You were never weak," she says. "You were careless." Samson says nothing. But in the silence, he feels something unfamiliar brushing his shoulders. His hair, growing back, not as a promise, but as a reminder of a calling he abandoned, a covenant he treated lightly, a God he trusted only when strength obeyed him. In that moment, Samson understands something terrifying. Redemption is heavier than chains, because chains can be broken. Redemption must be carried. And in the darkness of Gaza, under a sun, he cannot see Samson's real battle finally begins. Samson's ambition to decode the enemy's dominance led him directly into the arms of his desire and the heart of his compromise. He demanded the Philistine woman Tamar, not just out of lust, but because he believed proximity to the Philistine elite was the only way to steal the Iron Engine's secrets. His parents pleaded, but Samson's resolve was ironclad. He saw himself as a military strategist, not just a Nazirite. While tracking a Philistine patrol near the Timnah Pass, a young lion erupted from the scrub, a violent golden blur meant to end his mission. The fury of the spirit descended upon Samson, pure and blinding, ripping the beast apart with effortless, terrible force. He stood victorious, covered in gore, an undeniable sign of divine favor. But the victory felt hollow. It was power used for his own agenda. Days later, he returned. The sun had bleached the carcass, but inside, where no soldier would dare look, he found it not just the sweet forbidden honey, but meticulously carved codes and schematics, scratched onto the dried bone and sinew critical fragments of Philistia's Iron Engine design. This was the intelligence he had risked everything for. Samson plunged his hands into the remains. In that single deliberate action, he made his choice. He violated his Nazirite vow, not for a taste of sweetness, but for a taste of control. He chose the result, the military advantage, over the sanctity of his calling. He rationalized that God would surely prefer the practical deliverance of Israel over a mere ceremonial restriction. The end, he assured himself, justified the desecration. His parents saw the danger, saw the darkness gathering around him, yet their fear for his life muted their protest. Better a son compromised, they thought, than a son executed for espionage. Samson walked away carrying the stolen knowledge and a fatal secret. He believed he was stealing the fire of technology from the enemy, bringing light back to his people. He did not realize that by extinguishing the altar of his consecration, he was simultaneously dismantling the source of his true, terrifying strength. The Iron Engine was a physical threat, but the greater weapon he had just broken was the unbreakable covenant with his God. The wedding feast at Timnah was meant to hide tension behind music and wine. But beneath the laughter, everyone was watching everyone else. 30 Philistine men surrounded Samson, not as friends, but as handlers. They laughed when he laughed. drank when he drank, and listened closely when he spoke. They knew his strength. What unsettled them was his confidence. So Samson gave them a riddle. It sounded playful, almost harmless, but it was built on a secret none of them could reach. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. He spoke it slowly, enjoying the certainty that they would fail, and they did. As the days passed, frustration curdled into hostility. Smiles faded. Whispers spread. By the seventh day, patience was gone. The Philistines did not confront Samson. They went around him. They went to Tamar. Their threat was simple and final. Betray your husband, or watch your father's house burn with you inside. In that moment, Tamar understood the truth Samson had ignored. This marriage was never safe. She returned to Samson in tears. She accused him of cruelty, of secrecy, of not loving her enough to trust her. Each word pressed against his pride, his loneliness, his need to be understood. Worn down, Samson gave her the answer. Before sunset, the riddle was solved. Samson knew instantly. The room erupted in laughter, and betrayal settled like poison in his chest. Rage answered before wisdom could speak. He paid the wager with blood, striking down 30 men in Ashkelon. But the fire did not stop there. The Philistines responded with calculated cruelty. They burned Tamar and her father alive, not as punishment, but as provocation. They wanted Samson unleashed, and it worked. Grief hardened into fury. Samson struck them with relentless force, then vanished into the rock of Etam. But as the smoke rose behind him, one truth followed close behind. The feast had ended. The fire had begun. And Samson was no longer fighting enemies, he was being shaped by the flames. Victory did not bring peace. It exposed the truth. News of the slaughter spread fast. 1,000 Philistines were dead, not by iron, not by strategy, by something pulled from the dirt. The rulers of Philistia understood the danger at once. Samson was no longer just a man to defeat. He was a force that disrupted everything around him. So they chose a different weapon. They marched into Judah, not with open threats, but with calm demands. They spoke of famine, of suffering, of a land collapsing under chaos. They blamed Samson for it all. Hand him over, they said, and this ends. Order will return. Judah listened. The elders gathered. They counted the cost. Faith against survival. Covenant against comfort. In the end, they chose safety. 3,000 men walked toward the rock of Etam. They did not come as brothers. They came as negotiators. Samson saw the decision before a word was spoken. He did not resist. He asked only one thing. Do not kill me yourselves. Do not let my blood be on your hands. They agreed and bound him with new ropes, heavy ropes, clean ropes. They led him down like a criminal. The people he was meant to save watched him go. When the Philistines saw Samson coming, they shouted with joy. Justice, they cried. Order restored. But heaven was not finished. As the shouting rose, the Spirit of the Lord returned, and power surged through Samson. The ropes collapsed like ash, and celebration turned to panic as he stood free in the middle of the chaos. He bent down and picked up the jawbone again. This time there was no game, no riddle, no delay, only violence. When it was over, the valley fell silent. The ground was soaked and bodies lay everywhere while Samson stood trembling, victorious once more. Then the strength drained away. His throat burned, his vision faded, and for the first time he understood a truth deeper than any battle. Power could rescue him, but power alone could not keep him alive. Alone among the dead, Samson lifted his face toward heaven. Samson survived enemies, betrayal, and bloodshed, but survival became his greatest illusion. Every victory convinced him that consequences belonged to other men. Strength still answered him, and as long as it did, he believed nothing could touch him. That was when Delilah entered his life, not with danger, but with comfort. She did not rush him. She did not challenge him. She stayed close, and Samson mistook familiarity for loyalty. Delilah knew exactly who he was. She knew the stories whispered about him. She knew the fear behind his name. And the Philistine rulers knew her. They came with silver heavy enough to buy a future and promises sharp enough to cut through doubt. Learn the secret of his strength, they said, and you will never live in fear again. Delilah did not hesitate, but she did not hurry either. She understood that Samson would never fall to force. He would fall to trust. She began slowly, questions wrapped in affection, curiosity masked as concern. Samson answered with lies and watched her test them. When nothing happened, he laughed. Each failed trap fed his pride. Each escape convinced him he was in control. What he did not realize was that the danger was not in the questions. It was in the repetition. Day after day, Delilah pressed him until strength felt lonely and secrecy felt exhausting. Her words turned sharper. How can you say you love me when you keep part of yourself hidden? The accusation struck where his armor was weakest. Samson had never learned how to be strong and known at the same time. Worn down, desperate for rest, he confused surrender with intimacy. And he told her everything. As Samson slept with his head in her lap, Delilah made her final choice. The blade moved without hesitation. Hair fell to the floor like broken vows. When Samson woke and tried to rise as before, nothing came. No surge, no power, only silence. The Philistines rushed in, seized him, bound him, and dragged him away, while Delilah remained still. Samson did not know that the Lord had left him, and that ignorance was the most dangerous moment of his life. Darkness did not arrive like nightfall. It came like judgment. The Philistines took Samson's eyes, bound him in bronze, and dragged him through the gates of Gaza. The city he once humiliated now consumed him. The man who carried gates on his shoulders was chained to a grinding stone, forced to walk in endless circles like an animal. Each step erased another memory of who he had been. Each turn of the mill crushed what remained of his pride. At first, Samson waited for strength. He tested his arms. He strained against the chains. He listened for the familiar surge that had never failed him before. Nothing came. No power. No fire. Only silence. And in that silence, something worse than blindness set in. He was alone with his thoughts for the first time in his life. The darkness gave him no escape. Every victory returned as accusation. Every compromise replayed itself with brutal clarity. He remembered the lion, the honey, the laughter, Delilah's voice. The moment he told her everything, and with every memory a truth sharpened. His downfall did not begin with betrayal. It began with small permissions he gave himself when no one was watching. In the prison, Samson heard a voice in the darkness. An old Israelite blind like him, imprisoned long before Samson arrived. The man prayed aloud, not for release, but for forgiveness. Samson listened for days before speaking. Finally, the old man asked him one question. When you could see, what did you live for? The question struck harder than chains. Samson had no answer. Strength had defined him. Desire had driven him. Purpose had always come second. That night, Samson broke, not loudly, not dramatically. He wept in silence as the mill stood still. For the first time, he did not ask God to restore his power. He asked God to restore his heart. He fasted when others ate. He turned away from comfort. He rebuilt the Nazirite vow, not with ceremony, but with obedience. Day after day, his hair began to grow, but more importantly, his reverence returned. Grinding stone after grinding stone, Samson learned what strength had never taught him: Power can defeat enemies, but it cannot save the soul. Vision does not come from eyes, but from obedience. In the darkness, stripped of sight, freedom, reputation, and pride, Samson finally saw clearly. His calling had never left him. He had abandoned it. And heaven watched as the strongest man Israel ever knew became the most broken, because only then was he ready to become the most dangerous again. The festival of Dagon filled Gaza with certainty. Thousands gathered beneath the open sky and inside the massive stone temple, convinced they were witnessing the proof of their God's superiority. This was not only a religious celebration, it was a political announcement, a military boast, a declaration that the God of Israel had been humiliated and replaced. Then Samson was brought out, blind, shaven, shackled. The man who once shattered armies was led forward like a trophy. Laughter erupted as priests praised Dagon and rulers lifted cups in triumph. They demanded entertainment, a final display to seal their victory. Samson listened in silence, measuring the space, with every step counting the echoes, sensing the weight of thousands pressed above him. His body was weak, but his awareness was sharp. They forced him into combat, not to test him, but to mock him. A Philistine champion stepped forward, armored in iron, confident, smiling. The crowd roared as Samson moved cautiously, not with strength, but with memory and discipline learned in darkness. He fought briefly, absorbing blows, adjusting, enduring. Then he fell, struck down. The temple exploded in cheers. To them, this was the end. The final humiliation of a defeated God and his broken servant. But Samson was not finished. As he lay on the stone floor, mocked and bleeding, his hands searched the ground. He felt the cold pillars, the balance, the weight they carried. The design meant to glorify Dagon became clear beneath his fingers. In that moment, Samson understood his purpose had never been about survival or revenge. It was about surrender. He turned his face upward, not toward the crowd, not toward his enemies, but toward heaven. His prayer was not loud. It was not angry. It was simple and final. Remember me. Strengthen me one last time, not for my name, but for your people. The Philistines believed they were watching a spectacle. They did not realize they were standing inside a prayer that would rewrite history. The laughter continued. The music played. The pillars stood silent, and heaven listened. A hush swept through the temple, the kind of silence that signals the end of something massive. Samson stood between the pillars, blind, yet unshaken. His hands pressed against cold stone, feeling the enormous weight of the structure resting on his palms. He did not pray to survive. He did not ask for his name to endure. He asked only that his life, broken and squandered, would finally fulfill its purpose. And then the strength returned, not as fury, but as certainty, steady and terrifying in its calm. Samson leaned in and pushed. Stone groaned like a living thing. Iron screamed as it twisted under pressure it was never meant to bear. Above him, laughter faltered, then fractured into screams. The temple built to exalt Dagon began to betray its own foundations. Pride cracked. Power built on conquest collapsed inward. Dust filled the air as the first stones gave way. Still, Samson did not stop. He drove himself harder, pouring every breath, every ounce of borrowed strength into one final act of obedience. "Let me die with them," he said, not in revenge, but in resolve. The pillars shifted, the roof buckled, and then the entire temple fell, crushing kings, commanders, and worshippers in a single thunderous moment. What was meant to display Philistine supremacy became the grave of it. When the noise faded, only ruin remained. Beneath the shattered stone lay Samson, the strongest man, brought low, the broken man made whole. In death, he achieved what years of unchecked power never could. He struck the enemy not only with force, but with surrender. His final victory was not measured in strength, but in obedience. Later, his people came for him. They carried his body home and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, among those he had been born to serve. Samson judged Israel for 20 years, but his legacy reached far beyond his lifetime. His story stands as both warning and hope. Calling survives failure. Purpose outlives weakness. Redemption waits even at the edge of death. Samson did not fall in defeat. He rose in meaning. Arms outstretched, life-given chains broken for others. And in that final collapse, heaven declared the truth. Samson learned too late, but lived at last. True strength is born only through surrender. Samson's story teaches us that strength without surrender leads to ruin, but failure does not cancel purpose. Even after compromise, loss, and shame, redemption remains possible when we return to God in humility. True power is not found in control, but in obedience. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories to life.